Hello my fellow hallowed hunters, today I will show you how to make the Ring Knight Straight Sword from Dark Souls. As always, a list of materials is provided in the video's description below, as well as a link to my Patreon where you can find any templates seen in these videos. Warning, this build will require the use of power tools that can be dangerous. Please take proper precautions necessary for your tools before you proceed. I am not responsible for any of your actions, so replicate these videos at your own risk. A little disclaimer before we begin. This video was supposed to be finished a long time ago, but I hit a roadblock. As you might know, I want my props to be as accurate to the original as possible, and because the Ring Knight Straight Sword ignites, I want my sword to ignite too. However, as you might have guessed, wooden sword plus flamethrower equals a pile of ash. I bought heat-resistant grill paint thinking that it would protect the sword, but heat-resistant does not mean fireproof, and the direct flame still burns the wood. So, until I can find a way to protect the wood, I will not be adding fire to any of my builds. But without any further ado, let's get started. For part 1, we will cut the base template from our wood. I have started by taping the template down to the wood. We will trace the template onto the wood using the fine-tip Sharpie pen. Make sure that you hold the template down so it doesn't move, and trace back and forth to leave behind bold guidelines. Then remove the template to reveal our nice guidelines. Now unfortunately for me, I was unable to procure a wooden plank wide enough to fit my sword template. But do not fear, I have a solution for this problem later. We will begin to cut out our wooden base. You will need a few clamps to secure your wood to a solid structure such as this table. With the wood clamped down, I will begin cutting the wood with the jigsaw. Be careful to keep your fingers away from the blade. And with your final cut, make sure that you catch your sword so it does not break upon the ground. We will now move on to part 2. For part 2, we will carve the shape of our sword from the template. We will start by measuring the thickness of our wood to see how much needs to be removed. My wood was about 2 centimeters thick, and I want my blade to be about 1 centimeter thick. So I will mark about 4 millimeters on each side and trace the line to each mark, using the meter stick to keep the lines straight. We will begin to carve away the wood to that line. I used a chisel and a hammer to carve away the wood all the way to the crossguard. Then, once I have carved the wood to the guard, I will use the shaver to flatten all the imperfections. Once you have done that, then we will trace the inner design of the template onto the freshly carved surface. To trace the fuller without damaging the template, I have poked holes into the template at each corner. Then you can line up the template and mark the wood through those holes. Then you can use the meter stick to connect the dots. Also, make sure that you trace the artistic design onto the wood as well. Once the folder is traced onto the wood, we will use a curved chisel to carve out the fuller. Be sure not to dig too deep, because you have to do this on both sides. Then you will take a flat shaver and taper the edge to the center. You will want to trace a guideline at the center blade edge. After a few days of carving, we can begin to see the blade taking shape. You can see that the blade edge is slowly conjoining on that central guideline, and also see that the curved chisel leaves this textured pattern on the fuller. We will not smooth this out, as this texture mimics the charcoal texture on the in-game sword. You will not be able to carve the artistic design near the guard with the chisel. We will instead use something more precise, like the Dremel. So it looks something like this. Use the cutter bit to trace the outside of the lines. You will also need to Dremel the spikes at the edge where the shaver cannot reach. Unfortunately, due to this video being recorded 2 years ago, I lost the footage of the handle and pommel. But it is pretty similar to the longsword, where I stacked one extra layer of scrap wood and then shaved the edge for a cylindrical shaft. For the ring knight straight sword, you will want a circular handle. This is not good historically, but it is what is in the game. The pommel is similarly cylindrical, meeting at a point. And with all that done, we can move on to part 3. For part 3, we will sculpt the horns that will be placed around the crossguard. You will need a pair of pliers, wire clippers, thick metal wire, a Dremel, some air dry foam clay, a lot of tinfoil, and your wooden sword. To start, we will make the wire frame that will hold up the horn. It consists of a hexagonal base that will support the shape and a long twisted rod that will act as the core of the horn to guide the direction. We will need to make 8 of these, and they will be embedded into the crossguard something like this. There will be 3 on this face, 1 on the side, another on the other side, and 3 on the reverse side. Take your wheel of wire and bend a centimeter length of the end at a 90-degree angle. This will act as a hook that will drill into the wood and help hold it in place. Then start bending the wire into a hexagon with about a 2 centimeter edge with 120-degree corners. Sorry, I drifted off camera. It's hard to measure it unless it's right in front of my face. Here is a hexagon to help visualize what I'm replicating. Once you have reached your starting point, bend the wire toward the center of the hexagon. Bend a 90-degree angle upward opposite of our spiked hook. The length and direction of this rod will depend on the horn you wish to replicate. I use these images to help me determine the correct direction. For this example, I will be replicating the spiral horn that is curling around the crossguard. Repeat this process with all of the horns. In hindsight, make sure that your spike is lined up with the wood so you do not experience the same misfortune as I did where the spike was not where I anticipated it. Now you should have all your horn wires finished. I numbered mine to help keep track of which one goes where. We will now start covering our frame with a layer of tin foil to add some bulk to our horn's base. I will continue to use our curled horn. You will need 1 long strip of tinfoil and 1 smaller square piece. Take your long strip of tinfoil and start wrapping it around from end down. The further you wrap it, the wider it should get. For some of the longer horns, we'll need more tinfoil, like this one. Then take the square, jab the spike through the center, and curl the edge around the hexagonal base. Scrunch it tight so it does not move. Remember that we still need to add foam, so this is not supposed to be as thick as the actual horn. The foil is only acting as the core base where we will apply the foam. Repeat this process for all the horns. After you have successfully sculpted all your horn's tinfoil cores, we can now cover them in a layer of foam clay. With these added foam shells, you can see the horns start to take shape. I will continue to work with our curled horn for this example. Take a large wad of foam clay and thin it to about a centimeter thick blanket. Wrap it around the horn core, ensuring that you cover all the foil except the bottom. Make sure to leave the base clean so the glue has a sturdy surface to hold on to. This is a fairly simple process, but the clay has a tendency to dry out fast. So if it has trouble binding with itself, try adding a little bit of water to make it sticky again. Try to close all the seams as best as possible. Once the foam shell is applied, make sure that it looks good before leaving it to dry. Repeat this for all of the horns. Alright guys, I screwed up. I accidentally deleted the last 1/4 of my video putting on the horns here. Yeah. Because my recordings take up so much memory on my laptop, I have to delete stuff as I edit, and I accidentally deleted my edited footage alongside my old footage. Next time, I will store my edited footage in a separate folder so that doesn't happen again. I tried to fix it, but I cannot. So I will just give you a rundown on what I have done and redo the parts that I can. First, you will want to spray paint the sword black. You don't need any other color, just black is good enough. It is very important that we paint the sword and the horns separately. You cannot use spray paint on the foam. The chemicals in the spray paint will cause a reaction that melts the foam. So we're doing both of these separately. Also, do not paint the cross guard here, like that part under here, under the horns, because you need the glue that we are gluing the horns to go directly to the wood. If you glue the paint then the glue will peel off with the paint. So don't spray paint where the horns connect, or they will fall off. After you have painted the sword, you will drill small holes into the guard where the little metal hooks on our horns line up. These little hooks and those holes will act as an anchor point where the horns will be anchored into the wood and they won't move around while you glue them. Once all the holes are drilled, then you can use this epoxy glue to stick the horns in place. I use this two-part epoxy glue called JB Weld Clear Weld Quick Setting Epoxy, which has a 5-minute working time. Keep in mind that this 5-minute timer is not when it dries. You will have to hold each of the horns in place for about an hour. And once all the horns are glued in place, I put a second layer of glue around the edges of the horn's base. This will help hold them in place even stronger. Then you give it about a week to properly dry. If the horns are still wiggling around, you'll have to glue them again. You want to make sure at this step the horns are securely in place. No matter how hard I try, these will not move. They are securely in there. You want to make sure the glue is holding them in. Then, after the glue has set and everything's solid, you want to take your foam dry clay, take it and smear it around the base of the horns, filling in any gaps or metal bits or glue splotches. I want to make sure that's all filled in and make it look as if the horn seamlessly flows into the guard. I was able to recover this part, so I will give you the visual demonstration. As you can see, the metal rings are glued into place and all of it is showing. We need to cover it up so that it looks as if the horns are growing out of the sword's hilt. Grab a wad of foam clay and wet the part that you will be adding the clay. Water helps bind the dry hardened foam to the wet clay. Then smash the wad into the crevice, covering all the unwanted metal and glue. You don't have to worry about detail yet, just make sure it flows smoothly from the sword to the horn. As you can see, everything is covered up nicely. Give it a day to dry. After the foam dries around the base of the horn, and all of the unsightly blemishes are covered up, we will start shaping the horn into the rigid hexagon shape. If you recall the shape of our wire base, we started with a hexagon. We will extend those corners of that hexagon along the length of the horn to twist around until it reaches the tip. You will try to make these curved faces into flat faces. These flat faces will help create a smooth base to apply the detail. We'll start by grabbing a wad of foam clay and rolling it into a long snake. Brush the water along the length of the horn that you will be applying the foam. Make sure that you add a bit of a swirl, and it always helps to use a reference. Once you lay down the snake, take your brush and trace the sides with water. Spread the foam along its sides to try and turn the round shape into a sharp edge. You will do this 6 times on every horn. Sometimes the horn is a little too thin to support 6 edges, so you can end one early to reduce the edges to 5. You want to let each horn dry for about a day. You might be able to do multiple horns at a time, but you do risk accidentally bumping one and ruining it, so just be careful. Now this is the redone footage, so most of everything here is already finished, and I have learned how to avoid some traps. You can see the horns follow a pattern, where we start from the top and make our way down with each layer overlapping the previous one. It is important to overlap these segments. If you do not, you will get this ugly seam that can't be hidden. Remember that this is supposed to be a hexagon with flat sides and sharp edges, so be careful not to squish those corners. To start, you will take a small bit of clay and roll it into a little worm. Always wet the area, then wrap it around the tip. Very carefully press the edge down and smear it towards the base. You will do this a few more times before leaving it to dry. At this small scale, accuracy is not important. We just want to create the illusion of planned detail. Unfortunately, due to the sensitive nature of the clay, we must let it dry before adding more. Otherwise, we risk damaging our previous work. It takes roughly 4 hours for the clay to dry to a safe working condition. If you want, you can start working on the other horns, but just be careful not to bump your previous ones. I will continue with this horn, which has already dried. After your first few segments have dried, we will add a few more. However, it becomes difficult to wrap the ring around the horn, like we did previously. So instead, we will only do one side at a time. Do about 5 to 6 layers. Let it dry for 4 hours. Rotate it and do more layers from the other side and let it dry. I do 2 sides at a time to make these 3 sessions. Once it is wrapped all the way around, work your way down towards the base with another 5 to 6 layers, repeating all this until you hit the base. Another important tip, make sure that you do not overcrowd the curves. This can get messy if you do. When the horn curls, the segments should bunch up on the inside and spread out on the outside. I recommend starting on the inside of the curl and working your way out. This way the hardest part is done first. Repeat this for all the horns. I'm not going to lie, this was the longest, most boring thing I have ever done, and took me about 2 months to get it all finished. And it's not even finished. When the horns have dried, we can start adding paint. I will be using black and burnt umber brown. For the black, we will very simply fill in any spots that have not been painted yet. Remember that I said we didn't paint the guards so we could glue the horns directly to the wood? Well, now you have to fill in any spaces you missed. Next, we will water down the burnt umber and turn it into a wash that I will use to fill all the carved in segments. When you make a wash, the water helps make the paint flow into all the crevices, naturally thinning it and giving it an illusion of detail. Normally you would use a black wash, but since our base color is black, using this burnt brown color will work great to give it a charcoal feel. I will also apply this to the horns. I would say to paint the horns black first, but my foam clay already matches the spray paint pretty well. You can wipe away any extra paint, but be careful not to go overboard because remember, the water makes the hardened foam sticky and malleable. Unfortunately, it is really hard to see the detail added by the brown wash from the camera, but it really does help the details pop. Now that the paint has dried, I will add the wrap. This was the darkest brown cloth I could find. The one on the sword seems to be darker. Maybe try faintly dyeing it black to get a better color, but every time I tried it, it just turned black, so I think this is the best we got. The wrap on the sword is also wrapped horribly, and it will be difficult to replicate without glue. I don't like gluing the wraps because eventually you might need to replace the wrap. So I tried my best to tightly wrap it into place by tying a knot at both ends. Make sure to leave a little tail at the top. In conclusion, the sword looks great, but I'm very disappointed that I couldn't get it to ignite like in the game. Maybe in the future when I have better tools I can make a metal version that can withstand the heat. The horns look pretty good, the foam is strong and hard, but I fear that the wrong leverage could rip them off. I think I need a better way to secure them to the sword. Overall, the build was rather difficult, a step up in comparison to the standard longsword. I do not recommend it, purely because sculpting 8 horns is a monotonous hell. Well, thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more projects in the future.